And elections will come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click,
Present.
Rep Cortez,
Here.
Rep Busey,
Here.
Rep Burrows,
Here.
Rep Kane,
Here.
Rep Fierro, Rep Israel,
Here.
Rep Middleton, and Rep Swanson.
A quorum is present. Good morning, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your pancakes for breakfast. Before we take up the bills on the agenda today, I'd like to vote out a few bills. If there's anyone who'd like to testify on any of the bills we will be hearing today, you must register on the electronic witness affirmation kiosks in the hall before you testify and indicate which bill you'd like to testify on. And if you've not done so yet, you have a few minutes while we vote out some bills to register. If you need assistance, please ask the Assistant Committee Clerk, Teresa Shirley, and she can help you. Additionally, if anyone has any documents they'd like distributed to members, please give them to Teresa before you begin your testimony, and she will distribute them for you. We can get started voting out a few bills. House Bill 88 by Swanson. The chair lays out House Bill 88 as pending business. Members, this is Representative Swanson's bill regarding candidate name order on runoff ballots. Are there any questions? Representative Middleton moves that House Bill 88 be reported favorably to the full committee with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The chair notes that Representative Vieira and Representative Middleton are here. Okay, Representative Middleton moves that House Bill 88 be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Representative Click,
Aye.
Representative Cortez,
Aye.
Representative Busey,
Aye.
Representative Burrows,
Aye.
Representative Fierro,
Aye.
Representative Israel,
Aye.
Representative Middleton,
Aye.
Representative Swanson,
Aye.
Representative Kane.
Aye.
There's 9.
The motion prevails. The chair lays out House Bill 273 as pending business. The chair offers a complete committee substitute. Members, this is Representative Swanson's bill clarifying when balloting material are to be mailed. The substitute changed the day of receipt from the 38th day to the 37th day. Are there any questions? Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? Hearing none, the substitute is adopted without objection. Representative Kane moves that HB 273 as substituted be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Representative Click,
Aye.
Representative Cortez,
Aye.
Representative Busey,
Aye.
Representative Burrows,
Aye.
Representative Kane,
Aye.
Representative Fierro,
Aye.
Representative Israel,
Aye.
Representative Middleton,
Aye.
Representative Swanson.
Aye.
9-0.
There being 9 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails.
Okay.
The chair lays out House Bill 1048 as pending business. The chair offers a complete committee substitute. Members, this is Representative Guillen's bill requiring political subdivisions that hold early voting choose a location set by the county. The substitute added all uniform elections, those in May and November. Are there any questions? Is there any objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the substitute is adopted without objection. Representative Busey moves that HB 1048 as substituted be reported favorably to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Representative Click?
Aye.
Representative Cortez?
Aye.
Representative Busey?
Aye.
Representative Burrows?
Aye.
Representative Kane?
Aye.
Representative Fierro?
Aye.
Representative Israel?
Aye.
Representative Middleton?
Aye.
Representative Swanson?
Aye.
9.
There being 9 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. The chair lays out House Bill 1067 as pending business. Members, this is Representative Ashby's bill allowing certain names to be removed from the ballot. It is a permissive bill. Are there any questions? Representative Swanson moves that HB 1060. Okay. Representative Cortez moves that HB 1067 be reported favorably to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Representative Click?
Aye.
Representative Cortez?
Aye.
Representative Busey?
Aye.
Representative Burrows?
Aye.
Representative Kane?
Aye.
Representative Fierro?
Aye.
Representative Israel?
Aye.
Representative Middleton?
Aye.
Representative Swanson?
No.
8 to 1.
There being 8 ayes and 1 nays, the motion prevails. The chair lays out House Bill 1241 is pending business. Members, this is Representative Busey's bill requiring street addresses for polling locations. Are there any questions? Representative Israel moves that House Bill 1241 be reported favorably to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Representative Click?
It's very controversial.
Aye.
Representative Cortez?
Aye.
Representative Busey?
Aye.
Representative Burrows?
Aye.
Representative Kane?
Aye.
Representative Fierro?
Aye.
Representative Israel?
Aye.
Representative Middleton?
Aye.
Representative Swanson?
Aye.
9.
There being 9 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. Okay. The chair lays out House Bill 1421 as pending business. The chair offers a complete committee substitute. Members, this is Representative Israel Cybersecurity Elections Bill. The substitute updated language and added definitions. Are there any questions? Is there any objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the substitute is adopted without objection. Representative Cortez moves that HB 1421 as substituted be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Representative Click?
Aye.
Representative Cortez?
Aye.
Representative Busey?
Aye.
Representative Burrows?
Aye.
Representative Kane?
Aye.
Representative Fierro?
Aye.
Representative Israel?
Aye.
Representative Middleton?
Nay.
And Representative Swanson?
Aye.
7 to 2.
There being 7 ayes and 2 nays, the motion prevails. Those are the bills today, and we can start new business. The chair lays out HB 529 and recognizes Representative Miller to explain the bill.
Thank you, Chairwoman Click and members. Good to see you all this morning, bright and early. This bill has to do with, relates to the appointment of a volunteer deputy registrar. I think most of us know what they do and registering people to vote. To be a VDR, a person must apply and take a training conducted by the county voter registrar. All deputy registrar terms expire on December 31st following a general election. This requires all persons who wish to continue in this role to once again do the training with the voter registrar. Since most of these volunteers have just performed these duties, the trainings are duplicative, and unless there is a change in state law or county processing of applications. This process is time-consuming for voter registrars and the volunteers. Now, this bill is permissive. It's not mandatory for the voter registrars to do this. And so, as a former county chairman, I know many people who've been doing this for years, and they do a very good job. And so there will be no requirement under this bill for those registrars, based on the determination of the voter registrar, to have them go through the training again. That's what this simply does. So it allows the voter registrar to require the in-person training of any deputy who has any performance issues during the past term. And there may be some issues that some of the registrars, they didn't turn their registrations in on time. They didn't complete them, and complete them properly. And so those people would not, hopefully, would not be allowed to do this without attending the training again. So with that, I believe there are some people here to testify. And so I'll be happy to answer any questions at this point. Anybody have any questions?
Members, any questions?
Okay. I reserve the right to close.
The chair calls Kay Tyner. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the measure for the record.
Kay Tyner, representing myself, a longtime precinct chair, election judge, member of Harris County Early Voting Ballot Board and Signature Verification Committee, and testifying in opposition to HB 529.
Okay, we have you in the system as for it, but you're actually opposed to it.
Opposed to.
Okay, then we need to change that. I'm
sorry.
going to direct the clerk to change your position. Do we have your permission to do that?
You do.
All
Thank
right,
you
thank
very
you.
much.
Okay, please go ahead.
This bill basically provides that a deputy voter registrar can renew annually for an unlimited number of years as long as they indicate that they have read and understood the changes in election law provided by the county registrar and claim that they have not disqualified themselves from service through acts described in 13.031. We believe that both these assumptive stipulations represent unreasonable stretches of reality. We know there are legislators working in this building today who could read a new line of election code and arrive at different conclusions as to its meaning and application. So there's a high likelihood that the average citizen would have questions on the intent of new code and require specific examples in order to correctly apply new provisions in election code related to voter registration. Section 13.31 deals with several issues, among which are final conviction of a felony offense. We're not sure we want to trust that a recently convicted felon would tell the truth on his deputy voter registrar renewal form. The reality is that statute requires that our election judges, alternate judges, and some clerks receive annual training on Texas election code, even though the legislature only changes it every 2 years. That's because the code is complicated and the courts are constantly altering the interpretation of sections of the code. Our election judges and clerks are continually under scrutiny by one another, by voters, and by poll watchers. They can be held accountable if they deviate from code. Yet we require even the most experienced of these election workers to receive training annually. Deputy voter registrars are not observed as they perform their duties. They're pretty much on their own. There are at least 24 bills this session which dramatically affect voter registration and therefore the jobs of deputy voter registrars. It's a serious situation if a potential voter's registration is rejected because the deputy registrar didn't understand a new position of the election code. If this bill were to pass and become effective in September, and if any of the voter registration bills filed to date in this session were also passed with a September effective date, then thousands of deputy registrars could be renewed this December and left on their own to understand and apply some very complex new provisions of voter registration. Deputy voter registrars perform a valuable service, but they need annual training if they are to perform this service in compliance with our dynamic election code. Please don't pass this bill out of committee.
Members, any questions?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Representative Israel?
I would think that it would help you with any concerns that you have that this is permissive and not mandatory.
That's of some help, yes.
All right. And I don't think that voter deputy registrars are ever left on their own, as your testimony would suggest. Don't you feel like VDRs get an ample amount of communication and engagement from their elections officials?
No, I really don't. And I am, and I have been through the training recently. But I think the training is important. But 1 hour every 2 years, and then send people out with a stack of forms to go out and register voters. I'm not sure that they don't need some sort of reinforcement periodically. We don't receive a lot from our. Once we finish training, we're pretty much on our, pretty much out there. Okay. Anyone else?
Any other questions, members? Thank you for your testimony. The chair calls Glenn Maxey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I'm Glenn Maxey with the Texas Democratic Party here in support of House Bill 529. This bill is permissive. In Travis County alone, already this year, over 1,000 people have attended trainings to be redeputized as voter registrars. Many of those people have done this multiple years. This bill allows that clerk, that registrar, to decide which people get renewed automatically and which need to do training. It is selective. I would like to say that I am the perfect example, I hope, of somebody who may not need to do this training again. I first became a deputy voter registrar in 1970. This will be the 50th year this year that I am registering voters. I've done this training 26 times now, every 2 years. I know how to fill out a voter registration card. If the law changed and there's new things that a voter registrar needs to know, this bill allows that that registrar to pull everybody in for training. So I hope you support this.
Members, any questions?
Thank you.
The chair calls Brandon Moore. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the measure.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, members, and guests, thank you for your time this morning. My name is Brandon Moore. I'm the Organization Director for the Republican Party of Texas. I'm here speaking in favor of House Bill 529 this morning on behalf of myself. I do like the concept of this bill, as it is potentially easier for volunteer deputy registrars to renew their registration and continue registering more eligible voters. Recently, a few concerns have been brought to my attention about whether or not there needs to be any training, etc. One thought that did occur to me that perhaps we could, and I hate to throw this to the SOS or anyone else, but they have an online poll worker training program. Perhaps if there are changes in laws that would affect volunteer deputy registrars, if we could do it in an online manner, or some type of notification could be brought forth, or as Glenn just mentioned, have them come in for training when there are things that affect them. I think that might possibly be a good solution. Thank you for your time.
Members, any questions? Thank you for your testimony. The chair calls Sabra Schrader.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Sabra Schrader. I'm the Elections Administrator for Wise County, and I'm here on behalf of Texas Association of Elections Administrators today, or TAEA. Our association is in favor of this bill, primarily because it's permissive. The consensus among our association of elections administrators is that this would allow counties flexibility to do what they see best in their county within, obviously, within the framework of the law. I can speak for my county. We are a 3-person office, so this would be awesome if we didn't have to do this, because when this comes up, we are very busy getting ready for an upcoming primary or something. So this is helpful. We have a lot of folks, like Mr. Maxey said, that have done this for years. Obviously, new people will be trained. And we keep in mind that when we receive these voter registration applications back, I mean, we still work them. So, and we will keep our voter deputy registrars informed with any changes. And if there are changes to election code, I certainly will be doing more training. But we appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Members, any questions? Thank you for being here today. The chair calls Christina Atkins.
Good morning, Christina Adkins with the Secretary of State's office testifying on HB 529.
Members, any questions? Thank you for being here
Thank you.
today.
I'm sorry. Sabra Schrader. She testified for. Can you call her back up so we can change her position? Just ask Ms. Swader to come back.
Ms. Swader, could you come back up?
Because she registered on, but she testified.
You registered on the bill, but you testified for the bill. Is that what you intended to do? Or?
That is, and I apologize. I have not been here in a while. It's my first
Okay.
time to use it.
So your
I'm
your
like-
intent was to testify on the bill or for the bill?
For the bill.
For the bill, okay.
I'm sorry.
Then I will direct the,
Yes,
clerk.
we are in favor of the bill. I apologize.
okay, I will direct the clerk
My
to
first time to use the, apologize.
make that correction. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Representative Miller to close.
Thank you, Chairman Click, and I appreciate the testimony today. Again, this bill is permissive, and there are many voter registrars deputy voter registrars like Mr. Maxey, who've been doing this for some time. And I know many of them in my district who, unless the law changed, the rules change, would not have to come in and attend the training. So with that, I'll be happy to, the Texas Conservative Coalition supports this bill. And so with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Okay, I appreciate your support, and I close. Thank you. Thank you.
If there is no objection, House Bill 529 will be left pending. The chair hears no objection. HB 529 is left pending without objection.
Madam Chair, may I make a correction? And I apologize again. Sabra Schrader, I had the wrong notes there. It is on, we were on the bill as TAEA, and I apologize for the confusion. It was on with testimony, and I apologize. Jennifer just told me my notes.
Testimony pretty much sounded for it.
Okay, but your testimony was very much for the bill.
That is correct. We are, but it was the intention of the association was to be,
The intention of the association
Is on.
was to be on the bill.
yes, ma'am. Sorry for the confusion.
But you testified for it, so we're going to reflect that she testified for it.
Okay, your testimony was really for the bill, and we need to reflect that in there. All righty, thank you. The chair lays out HB 2504 and recognizes Representative Springer to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. It's good to be in front of you this morning. House Bill 2504 brings parity between all candidates in that those that seek to be on the election ballot should be paying an equal filing fee. Currently, under law, as you well know, if your party receives over 20% of the votes, you have to have a primary, and that's where those fees are charged today. But those that, and not only for the parties, but also if you run as an independent, you have to pay a filing fee to show up on the ballot. The only ones who don't are parties that have been less than 20%, and they're allowed to just send in a form and be on. And so this looks to bring everybody into an equal pairing. So whether you're a county official that has a $75 fee, or whether you're you're going to run for state representative and it's $750 fee, this brings all parties into that equal, skin in the game. This is. We've seen several examples, and over the years, in visiting with Ms. T, I know last session in Giovanni Capriglione's district, he had an opponent that was recruited at the bar. He said, "I'm moving out of state." They said, "It won't cost you anything. We just want to put you on your name." He goes, "Okay, fine." And you have to question, would somebody pay $750 if they were going to be moving out of state, knowing they wouldn't be eligible just so their name would show up on a ballot? And I think some of our, election integrity and those who are taking the fact they're running for us serious, this helps address that in a very small manner. But and I think we would all agree that the fees are not unmanageable for those who are seeking office. In addition, it's also not one that definitely does not cover the cost of running elections. So the fees were never intended to be one that totally covered the cost of elections. And so with that, happy to answer any questions. I know we have several witnesses, but we can go from there.
Members, are there any questions for Representative Springer?
All right. With that, reserve the right to close.
The chair calls Brandon Moore to testify. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the measure for the record, please.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, members and guests, good morning again. Again, my name is Brandon Moore. I am representing myself this morning, testifying against House Bill 2504 at the moment. While the author's intent may have been an attempt to level the playing field, or as he mentioned, providing equal skin in the game, when I started looking at this initially, I had the same reaction to it. I thought this was a good bill. Then I realized that third-party candidates versus those who file in the primary, those filing fees go to pay for the primary, only a small portion of it, 20 to 25%, whereas those that are third-party don't have any extra expenses on the state in the sense that their conventions, et cetera, don't require that. With that concept in mind, I believe that it kind of doesn't create a level playing field. However, with the understanding now that independent candidates, I would like to actually go back and review that a little bit more, knowing that now that they may have to pay a filing fee. That's actually news to me. I hadn't seen that part before. So initially, my gut reaction was to kind of favor this bill, and then I thought maybe. So have some mixed feelings on it at the moment. Thank you for your time. I'm honestly, I'll still have to say I'm against it. I don't think it's quite the right solution, but I do believe there are aspects of the bill that the bill addresses that we need to look at in the election code so that we can create a level playing field that would be equitable for all candidates. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? The chair calls Lon Burnham.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. I'm going to try to be clear in this. I'm Lon Burnham. I'm representing Public Citizen, and we're speaking on the bill. Our concerns are this is an example of legislation that, intentionally or not, has the tendency to preclude the participation of minority parties. And that, we think, is contrary to the best interests of a functioning republic. So while I understand and appreciate the overall effort of the bill, one really needs to question, is this another example of limiting access by other people to the ballot? It's not so onerous if you're talking about a state representative race. If you're talking about governor's race or a railroad commission race, it can be pretty onerous. We're on the bill. Thank you.
Members, any questions? The chair calls Kathleen Wall. Good morning. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the measure.
I'm Kathleen Wall, and I'm the chairman of the Election Integrity Working Group of the Republican Party of Texas, State Republican Executive Committee, and I think we should have these fees because a candidate needs to be serious about running a campaign if they want to enter a race. Any questions?
So, and you're testifying for the bill, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Members, any questions? No. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, we have Christina Atkins with the Secretary of State's office here. If you have questions for her.
One question.
We have questions, Christina.
Christina Atkins with the Texas Secretary of State's office testifying on
Representative,
2504.
Representative Israel.
Thank you, Madam
Yes, ma'am.
Chair. Ms. Atkins, for the sake of my own curiosity, what was the legislative intent behind having a filing fee in the first place? Do you know that?
For primary elections, it's to help fund the cost of the primary election.
But that really doesn't anymore, right? I mean,
Well, we do, the filing fees do pay for some of the cost, but there are some additional funds that are allocated from the state to help cover primary costs.
so what percent of, I don't know, this is a difficult question to, I guess, answer because you have urban counties and 10 candidates and
Sure.
2 candidates. But theoretically, this is supposed to help offset the cost of the election. But it seems like really a drop in the bucket compared to how expensive it is given the polling places and the rents and all that stuff.
And like you said, I think that varies considerably depending on the county and the number of candidates they have. I don't know the actual numbers off the top of my head, but I can find that information out for you and get that to you if you want to see a breakdown of what percentage is covered by filing fees versus funding from the state.
I don't know. I don't want to create a whole lot of work for you, but maybe pick a large county, a
Sure.
small, and a rural county, and then just for the sake of comparison, because it would just be interesting to see. My guess is that over time this has become less and less of a help to offset the cost of the elections, given the expense that's involved.
We're absolutely happy to pull that information for you,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify for, on, or against House Bill 2504? The chair recognizes Representative Springer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this committee is obviously immensely more knowledgeable on election codes and policies than I am, and Representative Israel. The one question I would sort of have is on that rural county. I know when I pay mine, it's $750, but I represent 22 counties. Do they get 750 divided by 22? I thought it just goes to the state and it all sits at the state. So I don't even think anything comes back to mine. Is my knowledge on that? Whereas in Travis County, obviously you're paying your fee, but yet the expense is massive, I imagine. I know it is in Travis County versus what Cook County's is. From there, one of the other things was mentioned was said, it might be onerous on somebody who's run for governor. Governor's fee is $5,000. If the governor paid the same as proportionate as the state representatives, their fee would be $112,000 to run for governor, because we have 150 times 750, and so there's you get to the 112. I think they're getting the bargain versus what we're getting. If you're going to run for governor and you can't find somebody to give you $20 out of the 254 counties, and you could even skip 4 counties and still have your filing fee, that to me does not seem like any type of threshold that is hard and difficult to overstep, to be able to say I want to run for governor for another party. And from that standpoint. So the other option when we looked at this, all these things is things that we decide. The 20% was something that was set in legislation. We could set that at 2%. It says any party that has over 2% in an election has to run a primary election. I think that would be much more onerous if we said all the third parties have to run a primary election system like currently the Republicans and Democrats do. So I think this was a much more non-invasive, trying to not destroy that, but just trying to put even footing with that. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Members, any questions? All righty, thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I close.
If there's no objection, House Bill 2504 will be left pending. The chair hears no objection. House Bill 2504 is left pending without objection. The chair lays out House Bill 1463 and recognizes Representative Gonzalez to explain the bill.
Madam Chair, members, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to lay out my bill this morning. House Bill 1463 requires joint primaries, and it amends other parts of the code to align the language. This would take effect prior to the 2020 primaries. Currently, 60% of Texas's 254 counties do not hold joint primaries. This means that each party is responsible for securing separate precinct locations, machines, judges, and election day staff, this leading to higher costs and duplication. Additionally, in some districts, one party may be able to secure prime voting locations, which often are subsequently used for the general election. In other words, one party's voters are able to show up to the same polling location for both the primary and the general election, while other party voters may need to go to two separate locations, one for the primary and one for the general election. These small inconveniences can lead to confusion and frustration to voters on election day. Imagine standing in line for 2 hours and to be told that you're at the wrong polling location. You have to go somewhere else and then stand in another line. You may not even go back to go vote. With joint primaries, we would only need to educate voters on one polling location, and so you're always going to be in the right line when you go to vote. For example, joint primaries are a smarter use of resources. For example, in a joint primary, you would only need four workers at a polling location versus in a separate primary, you need 6. So it would, and then in addition, the cost of renting multiple locations for separate polling places, also for the machine rental and less staff, it would have a saving cost. And so these cost saving would mean that would be able to pay workers that are working 14-hour days when it's already difficult to find dedicated people that are willing to work long hours. We'd be able to pay them more money. So with these cost savings, we would be able to pay them $12 an hour. Versus, I believe they get paid $8 right now. With that, there are some resource witnesses. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I reserve the right to close.
Members, any questions? In your county, do you have different polling locations for a single precinct depending on the party? In my county, we share locations. Mm-hmm. Do you do that in your county?
In Dallas County, we have joint primaries. I experienced where there were separate locations when my district goes into Grand Prairie, and so part of Grand Prairie is Dallas County, and the other part is Tarrant County. And so there were portions of the district when I block walked that I wasn't even aware of that we're telling folks where to go vote and depended on what party they were voting for. So they would have to go to a different place versus where everybody else was going.
Okay, because in Tarrant County, we share locations.
Okay.
Both parties are at the same location for that precinct. I remember the days before 2002 when husband and wife, one be a Democrat, one was a Republican, and they would have to go to two separate locations to vote. We ended that in 2002. Okay. So, members, any questions? The chair calls Pam Joyce. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the measure.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Pam Joyce, and I'm with the Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee. And I also am an election judge in my precinct. I'm the precinct chair, and I'm a past SD chair, SD 18. And I am testifying in opposition to this bill. Through the eyes of the Harris County Republican Party, and probably through the eyes of every county Republican Party in a large county, this is a highly partisan and distasteful bill. The convention process of the Republican Party of Texas begins with precinct conventions that convene in our precinct polling locations as soon as it is practical after voting ends on Election Day. Harris County has 1,012 precincts. The Texas Election Code 43.007 on countywide polling allow the county to reduce by 50% the number of voting centers versus precinct polling locations. Not saying it's going to happen, but we just went to polling locations coming up for the May 4th election. This will be our first opportunity that they're going to do this. This significantly disrupts the precinct convention process, and it affects only one party. Since the Democrat Party of Texas has completely different convention process, the impact might be minimal in small counties, but it is potentially devastating to a large county like ours for the Republican Party. This bill has nothing to do with election integrity, but is a blatant effort to disrupt the convention process of one political party, especially in larger counties, and we oppose this bill. But there's more. The primary elections belong to the parties. In Texas, primary elections are run by the county parties. Political parties are not a political subdivision or a taxing authority. They are not part of any state or county government entity. They are not subject to the open meetings laws. Political parties are organizations of volunteers who usually share common goals and values. One of the most important functions carried out by the volunteers of political parties is their primary election. The party faithful choose whom among multiple candidates will best represent the goals and the values of that party moving forward. The primary elections have no direct impact on any factor affecting the lives of citizens of Texas. They are contained within the party. The political parties have historically had and should continue to have the right to conduct their primary elections in the manner that they prefer. The political parties have historically decided and should continue to decide which election judge interfaces with the party members who vote in the primary election. This bill dictates to the parties that their primary voters must deal with non-party members when casting their primary ballot. This bill dictates that the Republican Party must alter its convention processes and for getting the voters to a county-wide center, to a different location for precinct conventions. Please do not pass this bill out of committee.
Members, any questions?
Go ahead.
Representative Cortez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony this morning. So you're concerned that it's impacting y'all's convention party rules?
Correct.
I'm looking at this as more as a convenience for a voter to be able to show up and, be able to vote at the same place, whether Democrat or Republican, just like we do for the general election, where we all go vote at the same location for the general. So what exactly would we be interrupting if we were to require joint primaries?
Well, my understanding is that because when you go to a vote center, you're going to have, you can vote anywhere in the county. And you are going to have people that are going to have to go find their convention, where if we maintain our, where we can hold our precincts on at the same location. Because according to the vote center rule, our county clerk could choose to close a lot of our precincts by the second year. I'm not saying that she would, but according to the law, the vote centers can close up to 35% of the precincts in the first year and up to 50% of the precincts in the second year. So that's going to affect our primaries if we go to vote center locations on for the primary. Does that make sense?
No, but I don't think this bill is asking or requiring that we have vote centers. It's
no,
for example,
but we are in Harris County a vote center, and if you
correct.
Go to this, then we're going to lose our precincts to run the primary that night.
And you mentioned big counties. I represent a portion of Bexar County, and we have joint primary voting locations. You just walk up, they ask you which party would you like to vote for, and you say Democrat or Republican, and then they give you the proper
Well, some of
ballot.
our locations are combined like that, but not all, because the Republican Party decides which precincts they want open, and the Democrat Party decides where they want their precincts. Sometimes they're together, sometimes they're not. But so it is going to disrupt our primary convention process.
Well, thank you for your testimony. I do believe this is a bill to help voters and to help make it easier for voters to be able to vote in terms of being able
Well,
to
it may
vote.
help them vote, but it's not going to help us with our convention process at the end of the evening.
We currently
if you have people have to go to a specific location, and there's multiple locations there, then all these precincts are going to have to find other places to hold their conventions on that night, which impacts the voter on having to go find his location at the end of the evening.
And I think the goal here is to increase and encourage turnout and participation, which being able to vote at one location for whatever party you're voting for at that precinct
Well, it's great for
would
us.
do that.
It's great for the Democrat Party. It stinks for us.
I don't think it's benefiting Democrats more than Republicans. I think it's a convenience
Well,
thing.
it is because the Democrats hold their precinct and their elections at a different time. They hold it like I think a week later, or at least.
No, we have in Bexar County they do.
Well,
it
not in
the
Harris
polling.
County. Okay, not in Harris County.
Sure.
I'm just going to tell you, not in Harris County. That's all. I'm only testifying for Harris County.
I understand.
Okay.
I appreciate your testimony, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Members, any other questions of the witness? Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair calls Glenn Maxey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members. I'm Glenn Maxey with the Texas Democratic Party here in support of House Bill 1463 requiring joint primaries. I am also the primary director of our party, and so I deal with the administrator of 42 county primaries each cycle, or this past cycle. The handout I passed out gives you a little bit of an idea of the cost savings that we have if we do joint primaries. Across the state of Texas, out of the 254 counties in 2018, 181 had joint primaries. So we only have about 70 counties that are not doing joint primaries at this point. The decision about whether there's a joint primary or not happens in September when the Republican chair, the Democratic chair, and the election clerk or the election administrator meet to decide whether parties are going to contract with the county to do the election and whether they have a joint primary. And the way the law is set today, any one of those three people can singly say, I want to have a separate primary and force this to happen. So it is, in my opinion, in the way we now administer primaries, the most cost-effective way is to have one location. You save on the cost of doing this. In some counties where there is the county chair who forces the joint primary, they're doing that simply to disrupt the process, to cause the minority party to have to go find additional polling places. I know that because I have a couple county chairs in South Texas who refuse to have a joint primary to keep the Republicans from having enough election workers to hold a primary. In other words, they are keeping Republicans from having a primary by forcing a joint primary. Those are what Democrats are doing. And I believe in some urban counties it's done. for that same reason, because the majority party has the November election sites, and the other party has to go find the beer joint to have their primary down the street. But the bigger thing is the cost savings. To be clear, when you have a joint primary, neither party is able to control what happens to the other party's voters. There is, spelled out in law, there is a Republican judge and a Democratic judge, and then Republican and Democratic clerks. They may be they're in the same location, they're sitting at the same table, but if there's a question about whether a Republican voter gets to vote or not, or has to vote a provisional ballot, only the Republican judge makes that decision. Democrats do not interfere, and vice versa. But secondly, there's cost savings. If you have a joint primary, at a minimum you have a Democrat and a Republican judge, Democrat, Republican clerk, 4 people. Paid $8 an hour for 14 hours, cost $448 for the election workers in that precinct. If you have separate, by law you have to have at least 3 on each side, so there are 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, so you have 1/3 more election officials. Minimum cost is $672 in a precinct. It costs $224 more per precinct to have separate primaries. The number one complaint we have in running primaries today is the cost, the fact that we only pay election judges $8 an hour. If we were to force the remaining 70 counties to go to joint primaries, we could raise election pay by at least $2 an hour. And if there's an additional appropriation, we could go to $12 an hour and have a rational pay scale for election workers. There is no administrative reason to have separate primaries in this state in 2020. None. The only reason we do this is to disrupt the process and to cause the state to pay more money.
Members, any questions? Representative Israel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Maxey, I hope you could shed some light. The previous testimony confused me with the discussion about the convention.
All right.
I don't get that. Can you help
me?
me?
The confusion here was about voting centers. This bill has nothing to do with voting centers. Whether there's voting centers in Harris County or not, you still could have a joint primary or separate primaries. The voting centers issue is the deal that was talked about there.
And how is it that? Well, first of all, I'm on the assumption that if I'm voting in the party primary, and I really want to go to the convention, then I'm going to find out where I can go to the convention.
Right.
I think the argument was then information about the convention is not appropriately conveyed to that partisan voter.
Travis County has joint primaries, and we have voting centers. Democrats and Republicans have figured out how to do their convention systems here with ease. 181 counties have joint primaries. There's 58, I believe, counties with voting centers. Lubbock has voting centers. I know they only have 50% of the number of precincts. That's a Republican county, and they have figured out how to do their precinct caucuses, evidently, in a voting center county. So I think that is a different issue that has to be solved about those conventions, but it has nothing to do with what happens during the day on how you administer the primary.
One of the points you're bringing up, I think, is an issue that we're all concerned with, and that is the scramble for election judges. And when you can pay another, $2 or $3 an hour, there's a little bit more incentive for someone who's able to take the time to be an elections judge. Do you think this is a significant block towards getting elections judges? The cost?
Absolutely. Under current appropriations, if I've been told by the Secretary of State's fiscal folks that if we were go to joint primaries, that they would have enough cost savings because some of the counties that are not doing joint primaries are the larger ones, like Harris County. We'd have enough savings to give everybody at least a $2 an hour pay raise.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions?
I did have one.
Representative Middleton?
Thank you for coming today. So just circling back, I guess, on what you talked about a little earlier. So you do not believe that counties should be able to decide whether they want to hold joint primary elections, right?
I think the state, I mean, almost every state in the nation has primary elections. They're done by an election administrator, and they're done in a joint fashion. We're the only state, I believe, that has this kind of ability to do separate primaries and force the state. Now, I mean, I can agree that parties are private associations, but they are funded in a primary situation by public dollars overwhelmingly. At least 2/3 of the money is general revenue from the state of Texas, and having a party just illogically forced to do this in a least efficient manner, I think, is the wrong way to go with public dollars.
I guess I had one follow-up on the handout you passed out. You said there is no policy reason for separate primaries, none. So you have never heard a downside or any kind of issue with voters by having joint primaries? In other words, pushback on requesting a Republican ballot in a primarily Democrat
I won't say
precinct?
that I've never heard problems. There are always problems when you have, I mean, even in a general election, there are what I call the ick factor. People don't like to be next to Republicans. Democrats don't want to sit next to Republicans in a general election even. And yes, there's, some situations where, in a very red county, I hear Democrats say when I go in and I ask for a Democratic ballot, there's hissing, that I asked for a Democratic ballot. But, I can't deal with human nature. I can't deal with that kind of factor. I don't think it's a public policy reason to say that there's a problem with joint primaries. The primaries that I administer for the Democratic Party is under the section of the law where the state party can administer a primary where there's no Democratic Party structure in small West Texas counties. In those counties, by law, they must be joint primaries because I have no Democratic elected officials there, much like the Republican Party has in South Texas. And so I'm in a position, I'm administering a primary where I have a Republican clerk, and all my election workers in those primaries, which are joint primaries, are all Republicans. And I have yet to have a complaint in those 42 counties about the fact that even the Democrats are getting their ballots from Republican workers. Because it's administrative stuff. If you're running the election according to the election code, there shouldn't be a problem.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members?
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair calls Brandon Moore.
Madam Chair, members and guests, again, thank you for your time this morning. My name is Brandon Moore. As I mentioned before, I am the organization director for the Republican Party of Texas. I am not only speaking on behalf of myself, but also on behalf of the Republican Party of Texas today against House Bill 1463. We are speaking against this because this bill would require all parties in Texas to do joint primaries. Some counties do find it beneficial to do joint primaries. Others do not find it beneficial to do joint primaries. Since the primaries are the party's election, as has already been asserted this morning, they should have the choice of whether or not to do a joint primary or a separate primary, or even separate locations. As Chairwoman Click alluded to earlier, there are 3 different ways that primaries can be held: jointly, or together in the same location but separate primaries, or completely separate locations. Since the primaries are the party's election, they should have the choice whether or not as to which manner they choose to do that. RPT Platform Plank 189 supports this concept when it says that each polling place should have distinctly marked, where possible, separate locations for Republican and Democrat primary voting. It is for this reason that the RPT must oppose this bill. Thank you.
Representative Israel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Mr. Moore.
Yes, ma'am.
The issue, regardless of party, that I'm focused on is the ability to pay precinct chairs, election workers, poll workers, a little more money. A little more money to say, thank you for taking some time off and helping us run the election. Is that a concern of yours?
The fiscal side of this, obviously, we always try to keep in mind. But when we talk about the autonomy of the parties to decide how they should be able to run their own elections, is something that we do believe should be respected to the extent possible. I mean, at this point, the Republican and Democrat parties are both forced to do primaries because of how many the percentage that they retain on the ballot. And when we talk about the fiscal side of it, the state says we'll compensate up to this point. The parties themselves can choose to supplement that pay, and we do have some parties that have actually done that and gone ahead and paid their workers more because they had the funds to do that. So they do have that option. And the last thing I would note about that is that while we always look for the fiscal side of things and try to save money as much as we can, there are times where certain things you may find that it is valuable to expend the extra money for that. Also, I would tack on there, I've been an election judge before and have been doing this for about 20 years now. It's been a little while since I've been an election judge, but previously, 10 to 12 years ago, we were paying in the primary $10 an hour for election judges and $8 an hour for election clerks about 10 or 12 years ago, and then they dropped that rate down, and that's when people really started complaining.
So the rate of pay and the availability of good people is a concern, but you don't think this is the vehicle to do it?
By forcing them, no, ma'am. I do believe that each county has the ability to look at their county and determine what is best for their county. We have counties that, while the platform may say you should have separate locations if possible, they look at it and they say it's just not possible for us. So we respect those counties' right to look at and assess at their own county and be able to determine what's best for their county.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Would your position, if it were incentivized, where it would be a situation where the judges could be paid more and then it was still a local option?
I understand the question there, and we've looked at that. The bill coming up later, we do have a card that I'm not testifying on the bill per se, but we do have a card against the bill because it does go towards that same end of getting the not allowing as much of an option for the parties to choose on their own.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
The chair calls Ed Johnson.
Ed Johnson. I'm here representing myself, and I'm against House Bill 1463. Speaking on my prior profession when I was working in the county clerk's office this last November. Let me back up. Start with why Harris County doesn't like having joint primaries in many other counties is voter intimidation. Last November, probably every day in my county clerk job, I had to go out to an early voting location to talk to election workers that were refusing to give out Republican ballots to voters in minority areas. They would talk to them in the language they had, Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, since there are those interpreters in there, and they're usually of the Democratic Party, those interpreters. And they would talk to them in those languages, telling them that they can only vote a Democrat ballot here. Had to tell them, no, you have to offer the other party ballot if they request it. There were several occasions where they refused to offer the other ballot. And that's during early voting, and in Harris County, that is a joint primary, and both parties are there. On Election Day, and we found in Harris County, the same thing happens. It's very difficult when you have 750 polling locations to find 750 workers to man all the polling locations. And when they're not manned, in minority areas, unfortunately, they tell the voters, no, you can't vote that way when you come in here. This last time, Harris County actually the Harris County Republican Party actually worked on separating, because on election day they tried to have both parties voting in the same facility. They actually worked on separating the facilities in the minority communities. And where they were able to separate them, they had a greater participation in the Republican primary. So there is evidence there that there is voter coercion, harassment when you come into a polling location, and that's why the Harris County Republican Party doesn't want to have a joint primary. And Harris County is not the only county this occurs in. This happens a whole lot down in the valley. This occurs. So now, talking about just the logistics of it with the Harris County Republican Party, to have that precinct caucus afterwards, when you have the countywide vote center in the joint location, is you need to be able to get a list of who the Republicans were that voted that evening, so that you can check them in to make sure they're qualified to attend the convention. I can tell you, when I left the county clerk's office in December, they were not there to be able to produce that list to distribute to everybody by precinct order to who has voted in their polling location. Well, on the electronic poll books, and when you go to electronic poll books, you're doing that. So it's the logistics of figuring out who voted in the election to make sure you can qualify them when they go to the convention. And as of December, Harris County wasn't there yet.
Members, questions?
Yeah.
Representative Swanson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Johnson, I just wanted you to correct your testimony. I think you said last November, and I'm sure you meant last March. That you had,
last March, excuse me.
And
yes.
Also, as a longtime election judge in Harris County, and then holding precinct convention, I would definitely agree with you that I don't know how we would function, how we would be ready and know who was eligible to be at the precinct convention. And if all the money had been spent to rent other general places, then how would the parties then have money to rent places to hold the separate precinct conventions is quite a concern for me. So I would just appreciate you coming in and testifying.
Yes, so yeah, you are true on the rental of the location. When we do precinct voting, the county is renting those locations and usually puts in the contract that they stay open the extended hours to allow the caucuses to occur. And this does just only affect one party, because the Texas Democrat Party doesn't hold caucuses on the evening in Harris County. They actually do their caucus at the state convention. The senatorial convention. So the Democratic Party is now doing their caucuses at the senatorial convention, where the Republican Party is still doing them on election night in the precinct caucuses. But it would impact the party in trying to rent facilities to hold these caucuses.
Right. Thank you.
Representative Busey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnson, thanks for being here and for your testimony. Can you go a little more into detail? You said you've had incidents where people are being turned away, are being told they can't have the other party's ballot. Is that like there's only one party judge there, or is both places still having both party judges where that's happening?
They were actually all run by Republican judges, but what was happening was, and this was happening mostly in the Hispanic communities, the judge there could not speak Spanish, and they were talking to the voter in Spanish, telling them, no, you can't have, you can only have the Democrat ballot, you can't have the Republican ballot.
Is there follow-up on that? Are those people still election judges that are refusing to?
Unfortunately, the county has no authority to let those people go because they are picked by the party, the workers. So, yes, that's what I said. Every day during early voting and during the primary, I was going to an early voting location to talk to workers, telling them that that's against the law and you can't do that.
Well, you're saying this continue as a problem.
It is continuing as a problem.
It seems to me if 181 counties are doing this, then there seems to be some solutions out there for how to handle these precinct conventions afterwards. I know, as it's been stated, the Democratic Party doesn't do it that way anymore. I believe we do it at our county conventions, but the Republicans still do. But if it's happening in big counties all over the place, then I guess we could probably learn from best practices what's happening in those 181 counties and how the Republican Party is figuring out in those to address some of that other concern. Wouldn't you think?
Well, I don't know how you're going to get over the voter intimidation factor that's going on in Harris County. So, maybe the other counties aren't as divisive, but Harris County is very divisive, and there is a lot of this that goes on in the primary.
All right, thank you.
Members, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair calls Sabra Schrader.
Clear this time. Again, my name is Sabra Schrader, Wise County Elections Administrator, here on behalf of the Texas Association of Elections Administrator, and we are testifying on this bill. As you've heard, all counties do this differently. Personally, my county does joint primaries. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Members, any questions? Representative Busey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How do the Republicans in your county handle the precinct conventions if they're doing a joint primary? Because that seems to be one of the major hang-ups with this bill. And I'd just love to hear what y'all do to make it effective.
Yes, Representative Busey. Both of my party chairs in my county, they have them on, I believe it was last session or the session before that when they allowed them to do their kind of a end of the week primary. So they have them on Saturday. One party will be at the courthouse, the other party will be at the convention center. So they don't have election night precinct caucuses anymore.
They just move it to another day.
They have it the Saturday after the Tuesday election, which I think we made that legislative change a couple of sessions ago.
Okay.
It seems to work for them.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Members, we have Christina Atkins with the Secretary of State's office here today. Do any of you have questions that we need to bring her up? Alrighty, thank you. Is there anyone else here wishing to testify on, for, or against the bill? I see somebody. Have you signed in with the kiosk?
I signed in.
Okay.
She did, not to testify, but we can.
Okay, we had that you were not intending to testify.
That's fine.
But if you'd like to, you can.
I'm Kathleen Wall, Chair of Election Integrity Working Group for Republican Party of Texas. And I want to back up what Ed Johnson just said about voter intimidation in Harris County. I was outside of a poll in Kingwood, Texas, which is a highly Republican area, last March, and a Republican voter came up to me and said, "Where do I vote?" He had been turned away in Humble, Texas at a joint primary, and he had been bounced around between different locations. He ended up at a singular Republican primary where I was there, and I looked at his card and I told him to go back and tell them that he has a right to vote there. But there is intimidation, and we cannot legislate how this should handle. Every county needs to figure out what works for them because all counties are different.
And your position on the bill is?
I oppose the bill, and I think that in the current process that the political parties can change their rules, but they shouldn't try to change election law. I think I've been to many precinct conventions, and I've also been to caucuses, and I've seen there's many important decisions made in these events. Who's going to be president, based on who's going to show up and vote for this at a local level. We also do important resolutions, and I think it's much easier, and you hear more voters' voices if they're able to go in the area where they live, which is the current way we've been doing it in Harris County. So I think each party should have a right to do it how they wish. Any questions?
Members, any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 1463? Have you signed into the kiosk?
No, ma'am, I have not, Madam Chair. I did. I came in after the committee meeting had started, and
You can come over here to the clerk, assistant clerk, and sign in.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Bob Green. I'm a resident here in Travis County. I have been an election judge for about 10 years. I wanted to...
I need to interrupt you. Who do you represent?
I'm representing myself.
And your position on the bill, please?
My position is against the bill.
Okay, thank you.
The reason I talk about this is really we talk about cost savings. In my particular precinct, of course, we have vote centers here now. What we have had to do, we don't typically have our conventions on the night of the election. We typically hand out little slips of paper to tell the Republican voters where we intend to have our precinct convention. And it creates a problem of having to try and find a place to rent. I realize that there are not that many Republican voters in Travis County, and especially in my precinct, which is near north central Austin. But it still becomes difficult to be able to do that and go find a place to hire out, because they're fairly expensive to do conventions, and if you're only having maybe 20 people at your convention, it makes it difficult to hire out a space for a while. But that's primarily the reason that I'm against this bill, is the cost associated with it. I think we ought to be able to have separate primary and a separate for each party. I just think that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in some counties, and yet it does in others. And I've had a good Democrat judge when I've been in mine. We've run a really good precinct, but now with the situation with vote centers and everything, it makes it very difficult to get our get all of our voters that we know as far as who voted for whom and when. So I think that's important. We typically have ours about a week later after the election is concerned, our precinct convention. Well, I thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Members, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 1463? The chair recognizes Representative Gonzalez to close.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to lay out 1463 this morning. Look, this bill is not a partisan bill. Both parties are represented at each location. Both parties work together to agree on a location. I know some folks mentioned voter intimidation. This practice is illegal and should have no bearing on how we administer our elections. And somehow Democrats and Republicans are able to share a location for the general. So I don't see what the big issue is. Overall, separate primaries are expensive. They're confusing, they're time consuming for everybody involved, and so there's simply no reason why we shouldn't combine our efforts to have joint primaries like the majority of the state already does and like many other states do as well. With that, I urge the committee to vote in favor of this bill, and if there are no questions, I will close.
Members, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
House Bill 1463 will be left pending. The chair hears no objection. House Bill 1463 is left pending without objection. The chair lays out House Bill 1691 and recognizes Representative Rosenthal to explain the bill.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this bill to you today. So, as you all know better than I do, current statute allows for the Secretary of State to set limits on the compensation of election judges and clerks for a primary election. Currently, those wages are set to be uniform, whether it's for a separate primary or for a joint primary. House Bill 1691 just adds a provision to the election code to require that election judges and clerks for a joint primary to be paid 25% more than those in a separate primary. That's really all it is. It's a very simple, straightforward bill, and I have invited a witness to testify on the cost effectiveness of this bill. Again, I appreciate your time, and I respectfully request to close at the end.
Members, anyone have a question? One of the questions I have, how did you come to the figure 25%?
It actually directly correlates to the efficiency savings for combining the primary. You have a minimum of 6 for separate, 4 for joint, and so that's 25% fewer workers.
Okay. Representative Kane, do you have a question?
Yes. I know you're here to testify about 1691, but I see a commonality here about this joint primary process. And so while yours isn't making it mandatory, it seems that the compensation only applies to joint primaries as opposed to separate primary elections. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And why is that?
It's taking advantage of the efficiency. So also there's more work involved in running the joint primary for fewer people, but I'd really prefer to allow the witness to answer questions like this. Okay. He's the expert.
Oh, could I ask you one more question, though?
Of course.
Because they may not. Did a lot of people come to you and ask you to solve a problem? Was there a problem that this is solving, Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes. Attracting election workers and judges for 14-hour days at $8 an hour, it's burdensome on both parties.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions, members? Okay.
Thank you.
The chair calls Glenn Maxey to testify.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Glenn Maxwell with the Texas Democratic Party in support of House Bill 1691. This actually is a bill that I proposed to Representative Rosenthal. After all the testimony you've heard on the previous bill, I thought maybe that one of the ways to move county chairs to believe that we should have joint primaries, to have the cost savings, and pass that on to election workers, is to create an incentive program. For those counties who are doing this in the most efficient way possible, those counties should be rewarded by those folks being paid more. I believe that this is in place. Election workers will actually talk to their party leadership about why they should be doing joint elections. I think all of the problems that were brought up on the previous bill can be ameliorated and solved with people just sitting down and working together. It's done in 181 counties. We should reward good behavior.
Members, any questions of the witness? Thank you. The chair calls Ed Johnson. Okay. Disappear. There, he's not in here. Okay, we will circle back for Ed Johnson since he's not in the room. The chair calls Sabra Schrader.
Yes, thank you again. Sabra Schrader, Wise County Elections Administrator, here on behalf of Texas Association of Elections Administrators. Our association is for this bill, in favor of this bill. We believe it will help us receive, it helps us, the counties that prefer to do joint primaries or that can do joint primaries, it helps out with workers, polling locations, and equipment. For my county personally, it is an equipment problem if I have to have separate, and we believe this helps. Also, we believe this helps on workers that, at least for some of our more rural counties like mine, they do have to drive. We don't pay them mileage, and so this is also helps us recruit more poll workers. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, members? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The chair calls Christina Atkins with the Secretary of State. I have a few questions, and I don't know whether any of the other members may.
Christina Atkins from the Secretary of State's office on 1691.
Do you know do you have a list or a number of how many counties actually do joint primaries?
So I double checked with our person that handles our primary finance in our office, and he said there's about 150 counties that we know of that either do joint primaries or share polling places. Now that number is self-reported, so it could be that there's a few more out there, or you know, a few less, but at least 60% to some extent have some kind of joint situation.
Would it be possible that maybe you could collect that information and share that with members? I think it would be particularly interesting to know not only those that are doing a pure joint, but also those that are sharing.
Places.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. I can consult with them to see what format that data is in, how it's self-reported to us, so we can let you know how accurate it is, too, with whatever those numbers are.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Members, do you have any questions for the witness? Ready. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the chair calls Ed Johnson again. Okay, looks like Ed is not here. The chair recognizes Representative Rosenthal to close.
Thank you again, Madam Chair and committee. Hope you all will view this one favorably, vote it through the committee. Unless there are any questions, I close.
Questions, members? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If there's no objection, House Bill 1691 will be left pending. The chair hears no objections. House Bill 1691 is left pending without objection. The chair lays out House Bill 362 by Representative Israel and recognizes Representative Israel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members, for taking the time to listen to this gem. This is our opportunity as a committee to help our elections administrators who testified just a couple weeks ago. They had two main concerns. One was, or requests of this session. One was they wanted online voter registration, and the other is they wanted help when it comes to their aging machine infrastructure. And there is a committee substitute, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if you laid that one out or not.
I apologize, Representative Israel. We do have a complete committee substitute, and the chair recognizes Representative Israel to explain that.
Okay, thank you. So this bill would create a voting system fund. Members, would be a grant administered by the Secretary of State where counties could apply for financial help in purchasing new voting machines. The state fund will be used at the discretion of the Secretary of State's office to grant up to 50% of the total cost of new voting equipment to qualifying Texas counties. This substitute requires that all voting machines purchased use available matching funds, have a verifiable paper ballot component for each vote cast. Our voting system includes our voting machines. If you stopped by the Texas Elections Administrator's display last week, you saw that the changes and advances have been dramatic over the last several years. Systems sold by the major election system vendors in Texas are not meant to last more than 10 to 15 years. Yet many of them will continue to be used past this time because there is no more federal assistance to help them buy new machines. You will hear testimony today from the experts, the women and men in charge of running elections in Texas. They know firsthand the extent to which our elections infrastructure is in need of an upgrade. We haven't had that help since the turn of the century after the 2000 election. Our estimates conclude that fully funding a match program would cost $158 million. Working with the elections administrators and clerks based on actual costs and quotes, we have determined that the cost for replacing machines around the entire state we would need $158 million. Senator Hinojosa, the Vice Chair of Finance in the Senate, and Representative Capriglione have assessed that the $158 have submitted that a $158 emergency contingency rider for this bill, both in the Senate and in the House. Senator Bob Hall is carrying this companion in the Senate, and I think I'd like our experts to come up and help paint that picture for just how desperately they need new machines and how this money could potentially be used. So I'll reserve my right to close, Madam Chair, if we can call up our witnesses.
Is there Simon in particular she wants to go first?
I think I'd like the elections administrators first.
The chair calls Sabra Schroeder.
Thank you again. Sabra Schroeder, Wise County Elections Administrator, here on behalf of Texas Association of Elections Administrators. Our association is obviously in favor of this bill. It is something that we have been hoping for and we need. Some of our counties have purchased new equipment. Some counties, such as mine, have been awaiting this legislative session in hopes that we can get new equipment. My equipment is 16 years old, and it has been good equipment. It is DRE equipment. It is the electronic equipment. It is the e-select voting system. It has been good, but as with everything, equipment does wear out. I just wanted to say on behalf of our association that there's a lot of moving parts to an election. The voter sees the actual machine they vote on. With this comes a lot of the other components to a whole voting system. You have to have either a poll pad or a tablet to check in the voter to make sure they are a registered voter. You have to give them some sort of access code or ability to access the equipment. That's another component. There's the machine itself on which the voter votes. And then, of course, there's all the related software for election night that we can tally those votes. We also, many of us counties program our own ballots. That is part of the whole system. So I know that I personally in my county, I've gotten a couple of different quotes from a couple of different vendors for an all-inclusive thing, but there are a lot of pieces to this more than just the machine the voter sees. We're having difficulties with our aging equipment, difficulty purchasing new equipment in those counties that don't have the funds to do it. The equipment has, like I said, has served us well. We baby it. We treat it very well. It has the usual wear and tear that equipment gets after 15 to 16 years, being hauled in the trunk of my car or in moving vans or however we transport it to and from polling locations. We get dark screens. Like anything else that gets older, it gets harder to find parts, harder to get worked on. So we are in need of new equipment, and some counties that have purchased, I know that they are in favor of, they are certainly would like some reimbursement for part of that. So helping us get halfway there would certainly benefit us. And I feel that this, I know this is a big outlay, but this could help us last another 15 to 20 years. I believe this is an investment that will carry us another 15 or 20 years with this new round of equipment, with better technology, better ease for voters to vote on. I'd be happy to take any related questions on any of this too.
Members' questions? Representative Kane?
Yes, Ms. Schrader. How do your communities feel about some of the new technology like touchscreen voting machines?
Everybody wants to touch my old machines right now, and it's still the old wheel. The touchscreen is great. I've seen the new technology. My father's 77, and he can use it. He cannot operate a cell phone. So I'm telling you, it's got to be pretty easy if he can use it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's how we use our cell phones. So yes, we don't
it's
turn
how
dials.
everybody with ATMs, everything. Yes.
Okay. Have y'all had any issues, or you're with an association? Is that correct?
Correct.
Have y'all had any issues with hacking touchscreen machines?
No, we have not. We have not. The vendor that I use, that was a concern in the 2016 presidential election. It was proven not to be a concern. To my knowledge, we have not had any of our counties in the association have any problems with any of the hacking on that.
Okay. Do you think this fund should reimburse counties for fixing all systems instead of just seems to be narrow?
I believe that we were in favor of this bill as written, where anybody that has purchased new equipment, the new equipment since 2016, I believe, and counties going forward purchasing equipment that meets the requirements of the new equipment.
Okay.
Fixing old equipment is probably not the way any county wants to go.
Okay. So on that, what do you think the standard should be in order to decide whether we're going to repair or replace equipment? Is there a line that we could draw to make that decision?
I'm sorry, can you?
You had mentioned you didn't think any county wanted to be in a position to be having to repair old equipment. So is there is that the standard that we repair out of this fund or replace this fund new equipment? Do you believe that should be the standard?
I believe the bill as written talks about to reimburse the replacement, to purchase or reimburse the replacement of a voting system purchased on or after December 1, 2016. And that's what we'd be in favor of. Because some of this older equipment, like my equipment is 16 years old and basically beyond repair.
Well, rather than not just timing, is there a type of equipment you believe is the best, that's most secure?
From my county's standpoint, I have reviewed 2 different pieces of equipment. I believe them both to be secure, and I've received quotes from 2 different vendors, and I think they're both secure.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Schrader.
Members, questions? Can you give me a ballpark about in your county? Wise County is a small county. How many registered voters do you have?
Yes, we have a population of right at 67,000. I have a voter registration of 40,000. It's grown from 32,000 just since I've been there in 4 years.
And how many precincts?
I have 25 voting precincts. We are precinct-based right now.
And so on a general election, how many polling places do you have?
I have 4 early voting locations, and we do open up all of our precincts on election day since we are precinct-based. Would like to go to polling centers. We wanted to dovetail that with the purchase of new equipment. That's my commissioner's court wishes.
So that would be a voting location in each precinct that you have?
Right now I do.
Okay.
If we can go to vote centers, we can narrow that down and get rid of some of my less desirable locations.
So just number of machines, how many machines do you think that you would need in your county to serve your needs?
For example, for 40,000 registered voter county, and I'm not small but not big, maybe sort of mid-size, I have a little over 200 pieces of equipment right now. That's just the voting machines. And when I requested quotes from vendors, I had them ask, I asked specifically for quotes with, if I stayed precinct-based, in other words, I'd have to have the same amount of equipment. Or if I could go to vote centers, possibly a little less equipment. You have more people per vote center, but you don't have to open up everything. So based on that, for example, for a county my size, it's going to cost my county around $1.2 million. That's turnkey. That's with the check-in, the software to tally at the end of the election night. So that's just a ballpark figure for around 200 pieces of equipment.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Anybody else have questions? Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
The chair calls Brandon Moore. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the issue.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, members and guests, again, thank you for your time this morning. My name is Brandon Moore. I'm the organization director for the Republican Party of Texas. I'm speaking on HB 362 on behalf of myself. I think establishing a fund to help local governments purchasing new polling equipment can go a long way in helping to secure our elections. Of course, the devil is always in the details. I have not yet had a chance to look at the committee substitute, but what I'm seeing so far in this bill as introduced does look promising. I'll be watching the bill as it develops, be looking at the committee substitute, and looking forward to seeing how this turns out.
Members, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair calls Kay Tyner. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the measure.
I'm Kay Tyner, representing myself in opposition to the bill. I am some of what I'm about to say may be different because of the substitutions. So when just take that into consideration as I read here. I'm opposed in principle to any fund in which no dollar amount is attached. With all due respect, I'm opposed to any fund whose replenishment is at the discretion of the legislature, with no objective criteria to temper the legislature's discretion. Transferring funds into the new account in the General Revenue Fund with no direction on the source of the transfer doesn't fill me with confidence. The dollars involved in replacing voting machines in large counties will be substantial. We don't believe any bill potentially involving these sums should present any discretionary opportunities. We're opposed to assignment of significant fiduciary responsibility and the due diligence for system costs to the Office of the Secretary of State, which is not chartered to either manage money or to conduct due diligence on the reasonableness of the pricing of capital equipment purchases or the bidding process through which vendors and pricing were selected by the entities. How is the current staff of the Secretary of State supposed to verify the proper use of the grants after distribution? Are they going to audit each county? We're further opposed to assigning responsibility for receipt of grant applications to the Office of the Secretary of State, which apparently has no statutory authority to question, challenge, or otherwise vet the validity or veracity of the applications it currently receives on other election matters. We don't believe anything in this bill can be fixed by a little editing. It needs to go back to the drawing board, guided by finance, accounting, and purchasing professionals. If there is agreement on a dollar amount of the fund and its sources, these professionals will likely create a per capita criteria for calculating the distribution of the funds. The concept for this bill needs to be quantitative and finite so that we don't end up with a fiduciary house of cards.
Members, any questions of the witness? Thank you. The chair calls Ed Johnson. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the measure.
Ed Johnson. I represent myself, and I'm against House Bill 362. Sorry, Representative, I was in another hearing and couldn't make it back in time. So, yes, this bill, I guess on the electronic voting equipment, this all started under Help America Vote. Back in 2006 is when the state of Texas got money to buy electronic machines, and it was very clear to every county when they went to all these meetings that this is it. Your counties are now responsible for updating and keeping these machines going. So many counties have done a very good job of that, putting away some money so that they could replace their equipment. Now it's about the time that everybody needs to replace them, except for Harris County, because Harris County in 2011 had a big fire and got all new equipment in 2012. So Harris County, its equipment's still living and going, but the rest of the state probably needs to replace its equipment. Many counties have the funds. This is going to be a very, very expensive bill. Just in my dealings with the county clerk's office before we left, we were asking vendors, because you have to plan out long in advance for a county the size of Harris, we were asking vendors for how much is it going to cost for new equipment in 6 years. And we were getting quotes of about $90 million for direct electronic recording equipment, what we're currently using. If you go to verify by paper trail, it doubles the cost. So if you take Harris County and it's over an eighth of the state, you're looking at $800 to $900 million to replace the equipment in the state. It's a big check. I don't know where the state's coming up with the money, but more power to you. And the direct electronic recording machines are the most efficient way to do this. You were just talking the cost of the machines when I was giving those figures. When you go to the verifiable paper trail model, you're now buying the paper and the supplies and pre-printing ballots for all the elections and things like that, where you don't have to do that with the DREs. And I have, in my 17 years of working with DREs, I have never, ever seen one that has been able to be hacked, a vote to be changed, anything to be able to manipulate it.
Members, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, we have Christina Atkins here with the Secretary of State's office, and I can call her up if you have questions.
Hello, Christina Atkins with the Secretary of State on HB 362.
Representative Israel.
Hi, Ms. Atkins.
Yes, ma'am.
If we can't trust the Secretary of State's office to take some money and spend it wisely, we're in a very bad place in the state of Texas. Can you talk a little bit about, this is not something that we just came up with yesterday. We've been talking with you and visiting with you about the fund and how we could best utilize these funds if we even get them. We don't know if we're going to get them or not. Can you talk a little bit about some of the mechanics, personnel, thoughts about administering the money from your perspective as someone who would be responsible for doing good things with this money?
Yes, ma'am. So a number of years ago, we received money from the federal government, part of the Help America Vote Act, and that money was distributed through subgrants to the counties for the purpose of purchasing new voting system equipment. So we are experienced in the grant management, from that perspective, and that we were responsible for managing that program 10 years ago when the federal funds came down. The person that actually ran that program then is still employed by our office and has a lot of experience dealing with both federal and state grants. So we feel pretty confident in the subject matter expertise in that area. In addition to that, one of the things that we have done in the last couple of years is we've had several conversations with the Department of Information Resources about getting DIR involved in the process as far as helping to negotiate state contracts with the voting system vendors so that counties can get the benefit of the state's negotiation power in procuring voting system equipment. And so we've had conversations with DIR about that. We actually just recently, they reached out to us again to initiate moving on to the next phase in those conversations. And so if we were to get funding and we have a grant management program that we have to run, we do have personnel that have an expertise in this area. And we have already started laying the groundwork with the Department of Information Resources on coming up with some kind of state negotiated contract.
Representative Busey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real quick, and y'all may not know this, but if you'll bear with me, do y'all interact with the counties on the need for these? I mean, do y'all have a knowledge, or do y'all have an opinion on the need for switching out our voting machines right now? Does the Secretary of State take that stance?
With respect to acquiring new equipment,
Mm-hmm.
the equipment that's being used today is very old.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of it's just experiencing end-of-life issues. The equipment is still good, it's still safe and secure, and we're still very confident in the security of the equipment that's being used, but I think that there's just issues that are arising with respect to using equipment long-term.
It's like reliability issues, not safety issues, but reliability.
I wouldn't say
with the
security
machine.
issues, but more so reliability issues. You have touchscreens that need to be calibrated more frequently. You have printers that might need repair work more frequently. But as far as the security goes, we still feel very, very confident
Sure.
in the equipment. I want to make that distinction. But it's just normal part of that cycle. It's time.
And
for
you
new
think it's time,
equipment.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, it just seems to me that if it's time, then it's the right decision for the state to do, as opposed to pushing it off to another 2-year waiting period. But thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions, members? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else here wishing to testify on for or against House Bill 362? The chair recognizes Representative Israel to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members, for listening. And this is my favorite type of way to do government in that it's a skin in the game. So our locals have to come up with some resources, and then it's a matching dollars type of opportunity. And I really like that component of the bill. If machines fail, our voters are harmed, our lines get longer, and voters get frustrated. This is a rider request that's gone in. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't, at this time, see an opportunity to take advantage of the Economic Stabilization Fund, which is a good use of one-time money, to get us through at least another 10 to 12-year cycle. I think it's our responsibility as the state of Texas and the Secretary of State to help us make sure we have the machinery to run our elections as efficiently and cleanly and without interruption as possible. Thank you for the time, and with that, I will close.
Yeah, questions? Representative Kane.
Mm-hmm. The goal of this is to help with replacing old equipment. Is that the goal?
Yes.
Then why aren't we allowing the fund to be used to replace, I guess, all equipment. And not just a certain, is it only for certain types of equipment?
Well, wouldn't you want the money to go towards the most severe need?
Okay. What?
It's not going to be our job to do that. It's the Secretary of State working with DIR will get good machines for those who need it the most and those who have skin in the game. Not every county can come up with $5, $10, $15 million either.
Okay.
This is no guarantee, but this is an assistance that's been sorely needed.
Yeah. Would this, do you know if the fund would be used to reimburse counties for purchasing DREs for curbside assistance?
This has to go towards complete reconfiguration of a system to go with the paper ballot. I mean the paper receipt type of machine. We're going with the next generation of machine here. There's no need for us to go back in time. We need to be looking ahead in our technology.
Okay. And so would you say the one with the paper backup is the most secure way for us to vote right now?
Well, we're voting very securely right now. There's no concern about these machines that we have being hacked. We want our staffs to be educated, but if we're going to have to buy the Cadillac, it's time for us to make plans for those old jalopies. It's a mechanical issue.
Okay. Well, I guess my curiosity is then why do we need one with paper, which
because
is the
they're
latest?
better.
Okay. So are they more secure?
You're asking me a technical question, and I'd be happy to have the Secretary of State or our elections administrators ask us or respond to that, but I don't know the answer about security, but because I don't want to surmise, but I'm guessing, and I shouldn't do that.
Okay. It just seems I'd want to replace all the old ones and bring us all up to date all at once, and that's what I was asking.
Well, if we were in charge, we could do that. And again, I don't want to let another 2-year cycle go by where we aren't giving some sort of relief. And this is contingent on a rider that may or may not end up being in the final budget, but it has strong bipartisan support. So I say let's go for it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other questions?
Thank you, members. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All righty. If there is no objection, the committee substitute will be withdrawn. Hearing no objection, the committee substitute is withdrawn without objection. If there's no objection, House Bill 362 will be left pending. The chair hears no objections. House Bill 362 is left pending without objection.
All right.
You should be able to see the witness names.
Okay. The chair lays out House Bill 2132 and recognizes Representative Click to explain her bill.
Thank you. The election code currently requires the Secretary of State and Comptroller be recipients of certain copies of orders related to the administration of elections. The Comptroller is not directed by statute to do anything with these notices, nor are these orders required to be retained. Comptroller staff currently utilizes other available resources to contact local officials, making these notices unnecessary for the Comptroller. House Bill 2132 would remove the requirement of the Comptroller to receive these while maintaining the requirement that the Secretary of State do. There's a resource witnesses here from the Comptroller's office to answer any technical questions you may have, and I'm open for any questions. Reserve the right to close.
Any questions for Chair Click? Okay, if there's none, the chair calls Kathleen Wall, who wants to testify.
She kind of just did.
You kind of just did, so now you need to come up and say who you are, who you represent, and your position on the bill. Next time you can just say
Absolutely.
not
I will
wishing to
testify. I'm Kathleen Wall. Thank you for having me here, and I support this bill.
Thank you. The chair calls Christina Atkins. If there's any questions, if there's any questions for the Secretary of State, Ms. Atkins is here. If there's no questions, we will let her sit right where she is. And is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 2132? We recognize Chair Click to close on her bill.
Members, House Bill 2132 removes an antiquated administrative burden that should save local government entities time and money. Thank you, and I close.
Okay. If there's no objection, House Bill 2132 will be left pending. We hear no objection to leaving it pending, and we close on House Bill 2132. Next, the chair lays out House Bill 2909 and recognizes Representative Click to explain the bill.
Thank you. House Bill 2909 is a 71-section bill that cleans up several areas of our election code that are out of date, unclear, or need to be updated. We've met with stakeholders, legislative staff, agency personnel to make sure that all these updates are non-controversial clarifications and modernizations. We could go section by section of the bill, but in the interest of time, I'm open for questions and reserve the right to close. The Secretary of State's office does have a resource witness here to answer any questions you may have of the agency.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Chair Click? Being that I see none, the chair calls Todd Key. Okay, we'll move on. The chair calls Pam Joyce.
I'm Pam Joyce, and I am testifying for the Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, and I'm testifying on the bill. This bill ambiguously tries to fix many issues in the code. As a result, the scope is large, and there is a chance for creating some issues. We approve of most of the changes made in this bill, but take issue with a few of them. In Section 19 of the bill, adds a new Section 63.005, dealing with confirming the registration status of a voter. Most of the new section is acceptable, but we'd like an additional phrase in Section D as follows. After the voter is accepted under subsection C, an election officer shall enter the voter's name on the registration omissions list with a confirmation code number provided by the voter registrar, who verifies that that voter should be allowed to vote in that territory. We historically have had serious problems with abuse of the omissions list due to a lack of accountability for the verification of the voter's status. A confirmation code number would at least allow us to track back the source of the confirmation. Section 27 of the bill amends TEC 85.062D. We have a real problem with the paragraph 3 in that section. That paragraph shifts important authority from the county commissioners to the early voting clerk. In many Texas counties, this means shifting authority from 5 elected officials to 1 unelected administrator. We think that's a bad precedent to set, and that important election decisions like that should remain in the hands of elected officials. In Section 52 of the bill, amends TEC 141.063 in a negative way. We're already having a hard time getting everybody to enforce law that requires a voter's/candidate's registration address to be the address where the person actually lives or resides. Per other sections in TEC, this provision further aggravates the problem, and we oppose the inclusion. In Section 69, the bill amends TEC 277.0024 by providing exceptions to the validity of a signature of a suspended voter on a candidate's position. It is impractical for the petition signature verification process to do this kind of research on a S or suspended voter, and we oppose these changes. Finally, at the very end of the bill, before the effective date of the repeal of HB 25 from session 85, from the 85th session, with regard to TEC 105.002C. That repeal would restore straight ticket voting to mail ballots, and we are absolutely opposed to that repeal.
All right, any questions for Ms. Joyce? Ms. Joyce, just to be clear, you're on the bill, not opposed to the
That's
bill.
correct. There were just some slight changes.
Lots of edits. Perhaps you might want to visit with the chair and work on this language. All right, the chair calls, any other questions?
Yes, one.
For Ms. Joyce?
Yes, ma'am. Could you explain to me how that section would allow straight ticket voting on mail-in ballots?
Okay, it just says in, right above the effective date, I don't have the bill with me, I didn't print the bill out. It is the repeal of HB 25 from the 85th session, which did away with straight party voting. But apparently this repeals straight party tickets so that the mail-in ballots are going to have a straight party ticket, which we're opposed to.
I'm not sure that that's true.
I mean, has it been changed and I'm not aware of the new?
I'm not sure that that's correct.
Okay, all right, sorry.
I would suggest you visit with the author of the bill, and we move on to the next
Okay,
witness.
thank you.
The chair calls Todd Key. Still not here. The chair calls Ed Johnson.
Ed Johnson, here testifying for myself, and I'm for the bill. I think all the little bitty nitpicking things were just discussed, so I don't need to have to go over anything else like that. It does do a lot of good things. It updates the law, kind of takes out things that aren't being used anymore. So maybe a little tweaking here and there, and it'll be a great bill.
Any questions, Mr. Johnson? Ms. Swanson.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, are you concerned about that it brings straight party voting back, and do you feel that it takes away county commissioners' authority to choose early voting polling places?
Okay. Let me start with the last one first. I do believe it does take away the county commissioners in small counties. It's in counties from the size of, I think, 100,000 to 120,000. It takes away their authority to vote in commissioner court to approve the early voting locations. In the real world practice, I will tell you the early voting clerk is the one that finds all these locations and submits them to the court, and the court usually rubber stamps them. In Harris County, every once in a while, though, a county commissioner didn't like a particular location and would suggest someplace else to go to that they thought would be more favorable. So every once in a while they did have input, and this would take away that input. You may want to ask the Secretary of State. I've heard rumor that sometimes small counties don't have commissioner court meeting, but once a month or so. So it may be a timing issue where small counties may not be able to get the early voting locations approved in court in time for the election. So I don't know, but I believe it does do that. On the last one, reading that, I'm not sure if it does do away with the straight party ticket vote. It refers to it in what you call limited ballots by mail, and I think it may affect the limited ballot by mail, the statewide limited ballot by mail for straight party ticket voting, maybe.
Could we count on you to discuss with the author and Secretary of State, and will y'all all be able to give us a firm answer on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe the Secretary of State would know the answer to that.
All right, Ms. Click.
That section refers to state write-in ballots of the election code, not straight ticket voting.
All right, any more questions for Mr. Johnson? All right, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any questions for Christina Atkins with the Secretary of State's office? Or we're going to let her sit tight, or you have any questions?
She might be
Do you
able
have
to answer
questions?
that question.
All right.
I guess not.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, let's ask, I would like to hear it.
Are you sure?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, Ms. Atkins.
Hello, Christina Adkins, Secretary of State's office on HB 2909.
Go ahead.
Okay, since a couple of people had brought into question and Chairwoman Click was clarifying there, I just thought,
Yes,
just for the sake of anybody else who'd ask, if maybe you could
Sure.
just give us some more information on the whole thing about the straight ticket. And
Absolutely.
also, Ed Johnson brought up this idea about, is there a reason, like, do small counties not have their commissioners court meet often enough? So both of the
I can
points
speak to
that-
both of those for
Okay,
you,
that'd be
ma'am. Yes,
great.
ma'am.
Thank you.
So with respect to the question about straight party voting, I can explain where I think some of the confusion is there. So when you look at the last section of the bill where it talks about repealing different provisions, one of the provisions that we want to repeal is 105.002. This is about state write-in absentee ballots. So if you request a ballot by mail and you don't get your ballot in time, there is authority to write out a ballot and send it in. There's actually a federal law that provides for this in a federal absentee or federal write-in absentee ballot. Once the federal law came into place and incorporated state ballots, we don't need this provision anymore. The confusion with respect to straight party voting is because this provision, 105.002, used to have a reference in here to straight party voting. Then when straight party voting was eliminated, that reference was also eliminated. So I think the way the repealer section is written is it makes reference to the fact that it contained a provision that was repealed, but that repeal doesn't go into effect yet regarding straight party voting. That's why there's some confusion there. It doesn't bring back straight party voting. It has to do with the fact that the part that we're looking to repeal had a reference to straight party voting that's going to no longer be effective when straight party voting is technically off the books. So it doesn't have any effect. It doesn't bring back straight party voting. All we're doing there is cleaning up the code because we don't need a separate section for state write-in absentee ballots. The federal law provides for that.
And the other point?
Yes, ma'am. About the question is about moving authority from the early voting or from the commissioner's court to the early voting clerk. So in that particular provision, it's not a blanket move of authority. What it's saying is in that particular provision for counties of a certain population, they can receive a petition requiring them to have additional voting locations or additional hours at those locations, and when they receive that petition, they're required by law to actually implement that and to have those additional locations. Right now, what the law says is that even when you get a petition, you still have to go back to Commissioner's Court to get final approval. Commissioner's Court doesn't have the ability to reject the petition. They have to do it, so it's just kind of a ministerial thing that they're doing at that point because the petition has already made it required for those particular counties. Because these petitions come in sometimes late in the process, we wanted to make it a little bit easier for the county clerk or the early voting clerk in that situation to be able to move quickly with the planning process. Because Commissioner's Court can't reject the petition, they have to add the additional early voting if that the petition requires. So rather than making the early voting clerk wait, go to Commissioner's Court and then give them the authority to take action, it would give the early voting clerk the authority to take action a little bit more quickly. So, and it's only for counties that fall under a certain population threshold. So it's a very small number of counties that are affected.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Atkins.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 2909? The chair calls on Chair Click to close on her bill.
The goal of 2909 is to update, clarify, and modernize the election code relating to elections, practices, and procedures. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this process thus far. Thank you, and I close.
All right. We are closing on House Bill 2909. Thank you, Ms. Chair Click. And the chair now lays out House Bill 2110. Oh, yes, and back on House Bill 2909, does anyone object to us leaving it pending? Being no objection, we will leave 2909 left pending without objection from the dais. We close on House Bill 2909 and we call up, we lay out House Bill 2110 and recognize Representative Click to explain the bill.
2910.
Oh, 2110.
Oh, it's 2910. My mistake, sorry.
Okay, 2110. I keep reading the numbers. All right, the chair lays out House Bill 2910 and recognizes Representative Click to explain the bill.
Thank you. House Bill 2910 clarifies confidentiality requirements for certain protected individuals in regards to the election code. These individuals include judges, judicial employees, and law enforcement, to name a few. This confidential information includes, but is not limited to, their residential addresses, contact information, and birth dates. We could go section by section into this, but in the interest of time, I'll open for questions and reserve the right to close. Secretary of State does have a resource witness here to help answer some of the questions we may have.
All right. Any questions for Chair Click? No questions, then we will go with Pam Joyce, who is registered as testifying on the bill.
I'm Pam Joyce, and I am with the Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, and I am testifying on the bill. With such a compensation bill, there's always a point or two that needs a comment, and we only have 2 comments, both in regard to Section 2 of the bill, which amends TEC 13.004, Sections C and D. First, we would like to make an exception to this section when the Secretary of State is implementing the multi-state comparison of voter registrations to detect voters registered to vote in more than one state. The precision of the computer match is improved by the inclusion of the voter information listed in this section. The more data points that are there, the better the match. The Secretary of State should be able to use this data in its cross-state matching process. Second, as hard as it is to recruit qualified election judges, we beg you to delete C4 from the bill. We can't understand what is so highly confidential about a voter being interested in being an election judge. We have a bill. We had a bill in the last session to address this issue, but it got lost in the usual end of session scramble. You deleted that line from HB 2911, so we're sure that not sure why that it was deleted here. Please delete that line and open up another source of voters interested in being election workers.
Ms. Joyce, would you mind repeating what bill you're testifying on?
2910.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, any questions for Ms. Joyce? All right, thank you. The chair calls Lon Burnham. Doesn't appear to be here. The chair calls Ed Johnson.
Ed Johnson, here testifying for myself, and I'm for the bill. I want to show y'all right off the bat, I have just discovered voter fraud. There are 10 registered voters in the Harris County Commissioner Court's office right now. 1001 Preston. That's in the room 900. That is the courtroom of the Harris County Clerk's office. Harris County Court's office. So the county judge actually has 10 people registered in her office right now. Just kind of making a little
Was that related to this bill?
Yes. in this bill about protecting people's identity? All 10 of these people are people that are part of this bill, and they have been forced to keep their voter registration secret at registering at the courthouse. So that is what this bill will do, is it'll help people be able to register where they really live, and because all these people happen to be law enforcement that are here, because I've checked them all before when I was back in the clerk's office, and help them register where they really reside. I have seen numerous, when I was in the voter registration office, law enforcement officials, judges, JPs that are afraid of people hunting them down at their house, hiding where they're, hiding their residence. They'll register at P.O. boxes. They register, at apartment units, things like that, just so their home address is not where people can search it. So this is a great bill. It really helps protect the good guys from people discovering where they live, and it helps them where they can register where they really reside, so they can vote on candidates that live in their district.
Any other questions for Mr. Johnson? Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Is anyone have questions for Ms. Atkins with the Secretary of State's office? None? Okay. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 2910? The chair recognizes Representative Click to close.
Thank you. Due to the nature of their work and the service to our state, certain individuals have been granted the benefit of not having their personal information shared for their protection. House Bill 2910 clarifies and cleans up these provisions in the Election Code. Thank you, and I close.
All right. If there is no objection, we will leave House Bill 2910 pending. Hearing no objection, House Bill 2910 is left pending. And we will move on to House Bill 2111.
2911.
Yeah, it's
2911.
I'm sorry, 2911. The chair lays out House Bill 2911 and recognizes Representative Click to explain the bill.
Thank you. House Bill 2911 cleans up several areas in our election code that are out of date, unclear, or need to be updated in regards to voter registration. We've met with stakeholders, legislative staff, and agency personnel to make sure that all these updates are non-controversial. We could go section by section of the bill, but in the interest of time, I'm open for questions and reserve the right to close.
All right, any questions for Representative Click? The chair calls Todd Key to testify. Do you have questions of the chair?
Yes.
All right. Representative Swanson.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to kind of address where the voter only provides the birth year. Do you see problems with then people being able to tell if they're qualified for a ballot by mail, and whether we can get a good match with other databases?
Well, Secretary of State's office will be up here as a resource witness, and they would be best to direct that question to them.
Okay. The chair calls Kay Tyner.
Kay Tyner speaking on Bill 2911. And we appreciate that in Section 2 of this bill, you've removed the confidential list, from the confidential list, the indication that the applicant is interested in working in the election. And we wish you'd do it in 2910 also. Back to this one, one of my points was the one that Representative Swanson brought up about date of birth, because we have a lot of, sometimes that's the only way we can distinguish, especially in Asian communities. The names are very similar, and if we don't have an interpreter. We need that to be sure that we get the right person voting. And that's really my main point. That's all.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Tyner? Thank you, Ms. Tyner. Ed Johnson? He's not in the room. Do we have some questions of the Secretary of State? Ms. Atkins, would you please come up?
Christina Atkins with the Secretary of State on House Bill 2911.
Thank you, Ms. Atkins.
Yes.
Question?
The question that Representative Swanson had, could you address that, please?
Yes, ma'am. So on that particular provision, what we're talking about is the voter registration certificate that goes through the mail. That postcard that you get that can, tells you where you're registered, what precinct you're in, and it just serves as a way as confirming, what your registration status is at that moment. We get a lot of concerns from voters about having their full date of birth on there from an identity theft perspective. They just don't like that information being put through the mail, where it has month and day as well. So just limiting that card to year would, I think, eliminate voter concerns on that particular identity theft issue. It doesn't change date of birth in any other place. It would be the full record everywhere else, just in the card going through the mail.
Thank
Yes,
you for
ma'am.
that clarification. Any other questions for the Secretary of State? Thank you, Ms. Atkins.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 2911?
Ed Johnson.
Mr. Johnson, did you want to testify?
Yes, please.
All right, come on up.
Ed Johnson, testifying for myself, and I am for this bill. The issue that you were just talking about of removing the birth date from the card, I will tell you, a lot of counties are already doing this. I think there was a court case that actually kind of was reversed eventually, but it did require that you remove it and just have the birth date on there. The real problem is the card is mailed as a postcard to save money and postage. So, if you put the birth date on there to be more convenient, you have to put it in an envelope, and the postage should be twice the cost. So I think maybe this is a good compromise, although there are only 15,000 Ed Johnsons in Harris County. It is awful nice sometimes to have the birth date on there so you can pick which Ed Johnson it is. The other one that a little questionable, it's a lot of work, but Harris County actually used it, and that was, do you want to be a poll worker? Do you want to serve as an election judge? Really, it should say, would you like to work elections, not be a judge, would be the better statement there. But Harris County actually used that quite often. We would be desperate for finding people to work in polling locations, and we start calling down the list to find people that said maybe they were interested. I would say 1 out of 10 would say yes usually, but it wasn't good results, but every once in a while you would find somebody.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Johnson? Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 2911? The chair recognizes Representative Click to close.
The goal of House Bill 2911 is to clean up the election code relating to voter registration. I appreciate all the work that has gone into this process thus far, and I close.
All right. Thank you, Representative Click. If there's no objection, House Bill 2911 will be left pending. Hearing no objection, we leave House Bill 2911 pending without objection, and I hand the gavel back to its rightful chair.
Members, that concludes our testimony for today. Next Monday, the House will convene at 10 a.m. Watch your notices for when we post, because it will likely be before 9 a.m. next week. You will be notified of the exact time no later than Wednesday. If there's no objection, the committee will stand adjourned, subject to the call of the chair. The chair hears no objection. The Committee on Elections is now adjourned, subject to the call of the chair.